You're listening to Secure Ventures, a show that follows cutting-edge founders in the cybersecurity space to understand their plights, glories, and revolutionary products. I'm your host, Kyle McNulty. I'm also a full-time investor at In-Q-Tel, a strategic investor for the U.S. intelligence and defense communities. This show is a personal outside activity separate from and not affiliated with In-Q-Tel in any manner. All comments, opinions, and sponsorships are wholly independent. With me in this episode is Ben Harris. Ben is founder and CEO of WatchTowr, building an external attack surface management tool that performs automated penetration testing and red teaming activities. Before founding WatchTowr in 2021, Ben worked as a security consultant for a decade, focused largely on penetration testing. And as Ben describes in the episode, what started as a combination of cobbled together scripts from his previous experience has since grown into a comprehensive automation platform. This episode is brought to you by VulnCheck. VulnCheck helps teams defend against weaponized exploits by delivering the most comprehensive vulnerability and exploit intelligence in the market today. VulnCheck gives enterprise and federal teams better, faster data so they can autonomously prevent exploits and reduce risk and outpace adversaries. So what's different about VulnCheck? The company delivers its solutions to teams in machine-readable and consumable formats for a truly autonomous approach to vulnerability prioritization and exploit mitigation. VulnCheck has close to 300 million unique data points, which is 5 times the exploits of ExploitDB, and 200 plus CVEs packaged into complete detection artifacts for proactive teams. VulnCheck provides a full suite of solutions to enable teams with rapid adoption of VulnCheck data, including its community tier of offerings and its enterprise class solutions, exploit and vulnerability intelligence, and initial access intelligence. With VulnCheck, teams can proactively defend against remote execution events, enrich every data source, and continuously outpace adversaries. If you're interested in learning more about VulnCheck and checking out the free community edition where you can play with their database of known exploited vulnerabilities, please click the link in the show description so they know you came from the podcast. Ben, thanks for coming on the show.
Great to meet you, Kyle. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, of course. This is an exciting and very interesting space in my mind, given my kind of early cybersecurity career was very much focused on an interest and love of penetration testing. If you look at my background, I never actually worked in penetration testing, but back in school when I was studying cybersecurity, the offensive side was super appealing to me, and obviously I think is to a lot of folks who are just getting started in this field. And there are plenty of people who've kind of worked in the cybersecurity consulting industry, especially in a penetration testing role, and then gone on to try to automate it to some extent or some component of it. So take me back a little bit, going back maybe a decade or so to when you were working in penetration testing. What was it like? What were some of the kind of manual pieces that you were growing increasingly frustrated with?
Yeah, sure. So I think, just to introduce myself very quickly. So my name is Benjamin Harris. I'm the founder and CEO for WatchTower. I think from my perspective, if we kind of look back to kind of 10 years ago for penetration testing, at that point, it really was seen as an art and less of a science. And so it was very much about how do we understand what systems do, how do we build that kind of comprehensive kind of understanding how data flows between different systems, and then beginning to understand, okay, how could perhaps a maliciously intentioned user or a unknown actor potentially influence those systems to do things that they weren't expected to do. And so that effectively spawns an entire industry of working out where we could apply penetration testing to more or less every single kind of facet of technology at that point, ranging from your kind of day-to-day generic web applications through to what we now call IoT, through to the OT space, and then of course kind of that higher level, kind of more broad kind of red teaming piece that I think we've seen a lot of organizations kind of gravitate to in the last kind of 5-6 years. I don't think the aim has changed. The aim has always been to understand, are these organizations secure? Are these systems secure? Could they be resilient to an attack? Resilient being a really, really important word there. But I think as time has changed, what we've expected from penetration testing and kind of what we've expected in terms of outcomes has really, really changed across the industry.
Okay, so thinking about your background in particular, there were these broader changes and shifts in the overall cyber ecosystem and landscape. But what made you decide that kind of you were the right person to go and tackle this problem? And why did you decide to go start WatchTowr?
Fair enough. So I guess the two parts to that question. Cyber has been a part of my life since I was a little boy. Since I was 7 years old, this has been an obsession in my life that unfortunately, again, to my parents' dismay, has not changed at all. I think the dream when I was a kid was that you could have a piece of technology that could hack anything just at will. So you point it at something like the Death Star and just see what happened. And so I think that's been a kind of subconscious thought in my brain since that moment in my life. The second part, I think, reality. So my background is consulting, so helping large organizations, global banks, global insurers understand when the North Koreans come, when the ransomware gangs come, how are they going to steal money? Now, the consultancy world has innate limitations, right? There are people, there are time limitations, and ultimately, as cyber becomes a lot more aggressive, a lot more persistent, the consultancy world just can't keep up with the rate of change that we see adversaries go through. So, put bluntly, that inner child desire to build Death Star tier technology to hack things, plus a well understood challenge in a real world industry that could perhaps make a proper business out of, the two things kind of logically join together, I think, and that's kind of the ethos at least around kind of the beginning of Watchtower. It's how do we build technology that ultimately can give organizations that same understanding, how would someone breach you, but reflect how quickly they have to move today. How do we give them, empower them with that information without relying on what are, just be very realistic about the frustrations, the limitations that come with the consultancy world. There are great things about that world, but it doesn't solve every problem that we face today.
So what was your approach in thinking about building a tool that augments consulting services as opposed to a, let's say, standalone tool that just exists within an organization's security team?
Fair. So that's exactly it, right? I think the best way to build an effective cyber technology piece, any category, right, is it has to empower people, it has to work with people. You can't work against people, right? And I think what we know is that there are today elements of different areas that humans are extremely well suited for, right? They are the best thing we have to apply to particular problems today. But on the flip side, there are areas of cyber, especially consulting, that very bluntly, we don't need humans for anymore. That is just the reality. The challenge here is not how do we replace everything with technology and remove humans from the picture. I don't see it like that at all. I see it as how do we free humans, consultants, people up to focus on the tough challenges, the stuff that we complain about every single day in cyber, and that technology take the baseline. And so my view has always been that we augment. We want to pick up the work that shouldn't be done by a human, automate the heck out of it, and make sure that it does it much, much better, much more, I guess, reliably, efficiently than a human could do, to free them up to go and focus on the industry's bigger challenges. And the kind of assurance space, the testing space is a very obvious space where this kind of disruption can happen. And I think the last couple of years have shown that actually the world needs to gravitate to that position. Otherwise, we don't make the progress we need to.
When thinking about how Watchtower is actually used today, is the intention that it's used by a consultancy, by skilled consultants that understand the customer environment and have the background skill set? Or is it intended to be used by an organization's internal cybersecurity team like the Red Team?
We work with both. So we work with a number of consultancies that I'm extremely proud to work with to support their ongoing delivery. But our primary aim, our primary kind of, I guess, ethos is to really deliver the value that we need to directly into organizations, right? So we want to tell them very quickly, something has changed in cyber, it has affected you, this is what we need to do right now. And to me, as I said many times before, our ability to give that information quickly to organizations to prevent breach from happening is really, really important. And so anything that kind of delays that process, we obviously want to kind of be a little bit ahead of. My view, though, inherently is that cyber ultimately, especially the space that we play in, needs to be accessible to all. And so by doing that, we need to perhaps make sure that it is applicable, not just to that higher tier echelon of organizations that can afford insanely competitive consultancy day rates, perhaps, but those that ultimately we see in the news pop up constantly, mom-pop shops are getting ransomware by Lockbit, left, right, and center, etc., because ultimately that's a problem that affects all of us.
Right. So making sure it's available to everyone. But then as far as the capabilities that you decided to develop within the tool, I mean, the penetration testing world is quite broad in terms of the different types of attack vectors, the types of tools that are used, the type of environments that have various variables that make it more nuanced as opposed to just being able to run in the same kind of scripts and same approach in every single engagement. So with that in mind, what specific capabilities did you decide to focus on when you were first getting started with Watchtower? What was the kind of key use case that you said, this is what we want to start with and grow from there?
It's a great question. So I think that there's kind of an age-old adage in the industry that the kind of the shell is always very tough and the center is relatively soft. So meaning the external perimeter is usually quite hard. Once you get inside the network, it's usually terrifying, and we kind of don't want to look too much further. From my perspective, if we look at kind of where most organizations face challenges, where we see smash and grab attacks, where we see ransomware being very successful, it is when they find cracks in that external shell into an organization. And so very quickly, we kind of said, okay, we want to focus on how we help organizations understand how would someone actually breach you. Not how are they going to complete a full end-to-end cyber attack at the beginning, but how is someone going to gain that first foothold into your environment. Now, there are numerous different ways to do that, and I'm very proud to say that we cover all of them as of today. But I think from our perspective, for day one, to your question, it was all about kind of, okay, where's the mass attack happening? Where is the mass pain taking place, right? So if you look at kind of CISA's known exploited vulnerability list, that to this day is extremely painful for most organizations. And to this day, that is one of the most powerful things I think a government has done for the industry as a whole. It's shone a light on what actually matters, and it's enforcing change. Really, really powerful. The second part is identity attacks. This has become a massive thing in the last 12 months, and I'm very proud that we kind of saw this coming from a mile away. But password stealer Trojans, data breaches have now truly been weaponized by attackers to effectively pop organizations without even needing a vulnerability. And that means that those that have historically had extremely hard outer shells, for lack of a better phrase, are now being sniped. So again, perhaps not the best phrase, but by a valid pair of credentials that allow them to log into VPN. So we took a very, very kind of broad, what do attackers do focus, and then of course built out from there in terms of being holistic.
Okay, and what was the process like in terms of actually building out those early capabilities, whether it was authentication or vulnerability testing? I imagine you had some scripts that you had been using in your penetration testing days that you could maybe use as a starting point. So how did that early product differ from just kind of a compilation of scripts or like automated bash commands?
It's a great question. So watchTowr V1 was built by myself, and much to the engineering team's dismay. And at this point, I think it's fair to say that it was a set of loosely cobbled together scripts in a scheduler, pumping data and throwing it backwards and forwards. And while I look back at it very fondly, I'm extremely glad and extremely proud of the engineering team we have today that managed to kind of pull us out of that massive hole. But you are right, V1 was fairly rudimentary. It worked. It could do the job it needs to do, and it was effective in finding some very scary things. But ultimately, going from, as I always tell people, right, going from looking at 10,000 assets to millions of assets every single day required a completely different architecture, completely different engineering effort. And that was when it was very clear that I should probably step away from the inner workings of how these things necessarily work day to day.
So what was it like then, thinking about the build out of the tool and actually maturing over time? Because you mentioned, okay, you have this kind of compilation of scripts, which penetration testers are already using. That's not necessarily going to find you any unique vulnerabilities, right? So thinking about what an organization is looking for, especially some of these larger enterprises. I know we talked about the kind of availability for everyone, but they're looking for the ability to find new vulnerabilities that they wouldn't otherwise be detecting. There's a continuity element to being able to run a penetration test on a regular schedule without having to worry about like paying consultants quarterly. Instead, you can do it all the time or every day or whatever that looks like. But again, how did you focus on actually developing the capabilities to identify novel issues?
So I think when we talk about novel issues, we have to split it out into a few areas. And I think one thing we know as an industry is that organizations are generally not the best at knowing what they are going, where they're going to be insecure, where they're going to be secured by nature of the fact they will fix it otherwise. And exactly to your point, right, in the kind of old world of doing things, you rock up with your pen test. So you'd say, here's your scope, go forth and hack and just see what happens, and I'll see it into the week, right? And that would be the kind of end-to-end cycle of that engagement. If we pull things back to what attackers do and how we need to build this kind of system, exactly to your point, right, to find the unknown unknowns that become really important. we kind of have to take a much more of a data-driven approach, right? So we kind of split the technology into different layers. The foundational layer, right, we need to know what we're dealing with first. So put very bluntly, right, what is in that attack surface? What does that organization look like? Because once we have a clear picture there, it's then data flowing up and down, applying to that base. So we have a separate engine that we built out and made extremely robust that will tell us extremely quickly, very live, what does this organization look like? So what would an attacker see if they targeted Bank A, Bank B at 9 a.m. on Wednesday morning, simple example, right? Now, that was built with a ton of what I effectively call hooks. So ways for us to interrogate the data, to look for known unknowns, known knowns, and then to begin to spot out weird behavior. So things that look bizarre. And if you imagine kind of how we operate as a business, right? Our business is data. We're a cyber company, but our business is basically data. We capture huge amounts of data across our client base. We analyze it. We look for things that are weird, like I said, anomalies, things that look unusual. We hone in on it and we build around it. And so we have a second layer that sits above that kind of foundational, what does the business look like piece, to, okay, how do we compromise this? And so that is effectively at this point a series of, well, what we would call machine learning today, through to very, very clear analysis, very, very clear ways to kind of spot, again, weird behavior that allows us to pull things out and say, okay, this has gone horribly wrong. But at the same time, has that happened at any of our other clients? Can we apply that kind of picture to organization 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? Now, where we have then really pushed things from our perspective is kind of going, okay, exactly to your point, right? There's the foundational piece here. There are the vulnerabilities that we're aware of here that could be data exposed in a source code repo through to that KV and infrastructure, etc. But that's not what attackers at the high levels are doing every single day as well, right? If we look at Lockbit with Move It 0 day last year, we've had this year full of VPN 0 days, etc. Actually, what we need to do is then kind of apply on top of that what some of my team have spent their entire careers doing, which is basically being the unknown unknowns. Not just finding it, but being the unknown unknowns, right? And so that's been a fairly interesting thing to build out with Watchtower Labs. How do we reflect the engineering capabilities, the research development capabilities that we see in nation states, ransomware gangs, and then apply that to the scalability of the data we have? And so that means that we are a fairly effective 0 day research team at this point. And then also what we're well known for are end-day rapid analysis stuff. So it means that we can go from this new vulnerability is being exploited to literally within hours with the data we've got. Okay, literally within hours of the data we've got to basically say, okay, who of our client bases it affect? How does that change and materially shift their posture quite quickly? And so it becomes extremely powerful as a framework that actually has the movings of 3 different engines that kind of throw data between each other.
When you think about these capabilities and investing in something like Watchtower Labs, how do you think about the broader architecture of Watchtower and leveraging maybe versions of open source tools that already exist, like an Nmap, versus trying to actually write some of these from scratch? Because again, you said you started by compiling a lot of these scripts together, but I would imagine over time you've had to diverge and write more custom functionality. What are some of the key pieces of like open source tools that you rely on within your platform today?
At this point, it would be, I mean, if we look at what SBOMs have done, at this point, it's a list longer than my arm. But I think exactly to your point, and the challenge there is exactly that. A lot of the tools built for the cyber industry or open source to the cyber industry have been built to demonstrate a function, perform an action. Nmap is a great example of this, right? But what they haven't been built for is what I effectively describe as intense scale. And so once you begin trying to scale these tools, whether it be in cloud environments, whether it be bare metal, etc., honestly, everything just falls apart. Mass-scan and AWS, very simple examples, do not play together. Like they just do not play together at all. And so, as you kind of said, there is a massive difference from being able to kind of cobble together what I eventually call Watchtower V1, and then actually having it reliably perform the basis. And if you think about those kind of 3 layers, right, that I just outlined, if the port scan layer, right, as part of that visibility piece isn't working reliably, everything else flows upwards in terms of like challenge that we have, right? So this stuff has to be extremely reliable, has to be extremely autonomous, but also has to be flexible with scale. And so honestly, as technology gets more complex, we've seen exciting issues, I feel like that, of natting inside AWS and how they do bizarre one-to-one NAT routing, completely destroy the results of port scanners, all the way through to, so we're based in Singapore, right? So we have some clients who operate and have operations inside mainland China, all the way through to the Great Firewall of China, basically poisoning DNS results at will because they can, that then stew everything else you might do as part of that kind of bigger and higher layer piece as well. So once you begin to look at things at the internet at scale, everything begins to break. It's fairly horrible as a process. But again, that's where the engineering has to be extremely, extremely kind of solid and I think reliable.
Part of what you're talking about is the ability to do some fine tuning and kind of integration and customization of these different open source tools to actually run properly and collect the appropriate information, right? But I imagine one of the other challenges is then thinking, okay, what about the results that actually come back from these tools? Any organization that's used to a report from a consultancy is
Correct.
ready to have their kind of 10-page, here are all the issues that we found, here are the remediation steps that come with them, here's the criticality that's involved, and something like an Nmap might tell you an open port, but it's not going to give you the remediation steps to go ahead and fix it other than a simple like, hey, go ahead and close that port.
Correct. So that's been the beauty of that kind of three-layer function, is that we don't have side functions. So side functions can look up and down that stack and basically build context. So we have a significant amount of systems that, exactly to your point, right? I think one thing that we are terrible as an industry of doing, and I think we've tried to be better the last couple of years, is that there's a massive correlation between alerts and noise equaling value. So if my Nessus or my other VA tool tells me that I've got 3 million issues, that must be a really good tool to sound 3 million things, versus something that might have given me 3 results, 7 results, but being exactly correct each time. But what we've seen is a massive change in the industry. People now can't handle this amount of noise coming from their different tools. They don't want to work through it. They need prioritization, because when life is fast, you need to know what you need to do right now. So exactly to your point, right? What we've built out is a very, very clear system that kind of stretches across those 3 pillars to kind of go, okay, we've got an open port there. We've got the behavior of something malicious there. Let's confirm it through this kind of filter, through this process first, before it goes through to a client. And so the validation, the exploitability testing piece is really important to us. Like a real red team, right? The world we all come from. Vulnerabilities aren't real unless you can prove they're real. Vulnerabilities aren't impactful unless they can actually do something. We're not sat here waiting for the stars to align, the weather to get to a certain temperature, and then fingers crossed it might be exploitable. Because when you're a big organization, you can't work with that. But what you can work with is those machines, a bit shaky, but okay for now. Let's not panic. Those 3, panic. Like right now, that is the thing we need to worry about, right? And so being able to validate the stuff that comes out of this, instead of just being a data broker, which is like, Nmap says this, client Nmap says this in the dashboard, not particularly helpful. But if we can translate that, contextualize it, and then actually demonstrate real-world impact of security posture, that's where it becomes valuable. That's where people can act on things very quickly.
Tell me more about the exploitability piece. How are you actually validating that, either with the tool or with human in the loop?
So I'm human in the loop. I think at the scale that we operate, with kind of millions of assets at this point, the team would kill me if we tried to involve humans in the loop at this point. I think there would be a mini mutiny. But joking apart, what we've been very, very clear on, right, is exactly that. I see our value in this space not being significant amounts of noise to organizations and saying, here's a database, good luck. Not very helpful. The challenge we want to help with is, how is someone going to breach you today? And that means telling someone exactly how are they going to breach you today, and being confident and being trustful in that. So every weakness, every vulnerability, everything that we think is a security risk when we flag it across an organization comes with what we call an impactless payload. So again, a big part of our engineering is kind of saying, how do we exploit this vulnerability, but in a way that A, is safe at scale, and B, is not going to impact the system that we run it against through our technology, so that we can A, demonstrate it is real, but at the same time have that confidence that we are not just taking down systems. And so that is effectively the mechanism we use to prove to clients that vulnerability is without a doubt a concern, but while at the same time ensuring it is actually exploitable. It's a major engineering effort on our part to have a bank of vulnerabilities that we can prove out safely. But it's the one thing that separates us from going, version number looks a bit wrong. You should probably patch 300,000 machines in the next 2 hours. Not very helpful. Through to, okay, those 17 are actually exploitable. Those are the priorities right now. And that's how you, in my blunt opinion, this is how we help organizations prevent breaches when things are against the clock.
I imagine there's some hesitancy or skepticism when you go to an organization and say, hey, we have this impactless payload. It 100% will not affect your production systems, but then ultimately you're running some sort of live traffic or live command on production machines, right? How do you get over that hesitancy, or rather, how confident are you that these are truly impactless for the whole suite of vulnerabilities that you're testing for?
So to give some context, our client base is heavy BFSI, Fortune 500. So for these types of organizations, availability is not a best effort activity. It must be available. If you take out internet banking, we're going to have a bit of a problem. And it won't just be my problem. It will be perhaps the entire country's problem. And so that becomes a little bit of pressure on myself and the team to make sure that we don't, mess things up. Ultimately, we're very, very proud of what we can demonstrate through clients. And I think as a business today, without a fully functioning marketing team, trust, integrity has been a massive part of why we've been picked up by multiple organizations. CISOs saying, this really works. Let me tell my friends because it's actually helping. And so through demonstration, through that trust we've built with others, we've been able to build a very, very clear amount of confidence in the fact that the engineering that we talk about, that impactless side of things, really does work. Of course, I think those we demonstrate through our kind of labs, roles that go through watchTowr labs, etc., we do know what we're doing. We are not just sat here kind of just throwing random strings at computers and seeing, oh, it crashed, that's exciting. We actually do understand what we're doing. We really do pull things apart because that ultimately is our kind of subtle way of saying this is exactly what fits into our tech as well. So yeah, we're very lucky to be able to demonstrate our technology very easily. We're very lucky to have the trust of all of our clients, and they're very lucky that they are quite so vocal about why they like working with us. So yeah, good place to be.
So let me ask then, you've been around for several years at this point. You were originally founded back in 2021. Have you ever accidentally toppled a system?
We've seen unusual architecture. I'll say it like that. We've seen some very, very unusual architecture, which you have to sit and wonder sometimes, A, why? And B, was this intentional? We've seen things like hundreds of thousands of IP addresses exposed to the internet, hanging off two high availability firewalls and hoping to handle one port scan. That's always exciting, right? And that is a architectural challenge that myself, the team, all the North Koreans are going to kind of fall into and kind of go, interesting from that kind of perspective. But from a kind of testing perspective, from a technology perspective, no, I can't give any examples. But we've definitely seen unusual architecture issues where very glad that we were able to highlight them, perhaps. But definitely made us sit back and kind of go, internet really is made of string.
Yeah, it qualifies as an issue in itself, like you said, right?
Correct.
So I already asked about the kind of report writing piece or being able to communicate some of these vulnerabilities. And frankly, I thought I was just teeing you up for a kind of canned answer about AI. So I'm glad you took it a slightly different direction than that. But I'm also still surprised to not hear a bigger emphasis on AI over the last few minutes here. And obviously you guys have been around since kind of before this latest generative AI wave, but tell me a little bit more about how you think about generative AI fitting into this broader kind of automation suite.
So it's very clear it's the future. It's an extremely effective capability that I think we're going to see numerous sides of the industry use, right? Whether it be defensive for baselining and taking out that piece that we don't think analysts should be doing and pushing out to get better things, right? Through to whether we see adversaries actually take proper advantage of it, and of course the offensive security space. The reason I don't lean into it too heavily, I'm very careful that we talk about, and I really believe that we should be focused as an industry on the outcomes, what we do, versus how we do things. So whether I use Python, Golang, I use LLM1, LLM2, in-house LLM, etc., to me, these are all kind of routes to the same output, as opposed to necessarily the output that clients buy into themselves. And so I think we kind of draw a distinction between them. That being said, of course, there are clear spaces where it's going to improve things, right? Whether it be how our long research team looks at flow graphs or how they trace data through a particular application, through to, of course, how we begin to kind of work out, okay, if this is what the organization looks like today, what are we missing? What could we think of? What can we push into a model that could take things a little bit further and basically have that kind of autonomous view of the data that, again, will spot things that humans just can't do, right? So there's a very, very clear direction in that direction. The very, very clear direction down that path around AI. It's really about how it's used properly and how it kind of enables things. Now, what I'm very conscious of is that there is also a big part of the industry that has kind of fallen down the AI hole and kind of said we are AI powered because they're a chatbot. That is now hooked up to ChatGPT. And to me, that kind of belittles where I think this will go as a space. But it is very, very exciting. We are cautious in terms of how we use it as a term, just because we don't want to kind of get pushed into a bucket. But it is turning into a very, very heavy piece of our roadmap and a very heavy piece of kind of what we aim to do.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like quite the suite of technology that you've built up over time here, right? Kind of without AI. And so, to your point, trying to find different opportunities to leverage AI internally to improve some of the different components and mechanisms, but not just kind of ripping everything up and saying, okay, AI first, starting now. Thinking back to the origins of your journey, there's lots of people, and I mentioned this early on, lots of people that have kind of worked in penetration testing and said, hey, I think there's some value in actually automating the different processes that I'm doing in this job.
Yeah.
I'm just super curious, did you talk to anyone else who had tried to take a similar approach before as you were going through the early days of Watchtower to just figure out how you wanted to approach it similarly or differently?
Absolutely. I think if you talk to most people in the pen test space who have been there for 4 or 5 years, it kind of got to the point where they also want to break a little bit. Everyone at some point has gone down the path of like, how do I automate myself out of a job? It's a well-trodden ground in the consultancy space, I think. Early days of Watchtower, there was a lot of, I've tried, it's impossible, good luck. And still to this day, there's an element of that to a degree. A computer couldn't do what I do as a human, good luck, but will always be here, etc. I don't disagree. Humans would always be part of the loop, but exactly to my point earlier, right? The aim has been to take out that bottom rung and then increase. Take out the work that humans shouldn't be doing, move up, take out more work that humans should be doing so we can push humans up. Now, what AI is doing, exactly to your point, is just accelerating that multiple steps further. And to the points where we have historically said, does a human have to be involved here? Will this only ever be done by a human? We're now questioning that. So if you think about a very simple example, right? Web application testing. I think it's been a well-accepted kind of logical kind of process that web app scanners have been very, very good at finding what I call kind of technical vulnerabilities in an application for a long time. SQL injection, file reads, command execution, the things that are scary but fairly binary. What they've been bad at has been the business logic testing, right? If I transfer minus $10 from one bank account to the next bank account, do I make $10 somehow, right? This kind of nonsense that does still exist to this day, but ultimately testing tools have not been great at. This is where AI is going to hurt. It's going to basically allow that type of capability to be built into tools very, very, very quickly. It will push humans up again, forcing upskill, forcing improvement, more strategic focuses on the challenges. But to the people who have kind of always said, this is not possible, life changes. And so that's where kind of the industry is going from my perspective. But it's a great example of where actually what was deemed impossible or very difficult to the point of where is the value 4 or 5 years ago, today is looking extremely achievable. And that I think will continue to be a trend in realization across the space in the next 6, 12 months.
Awesome. Well, Ben, I really appreciate the time. I think a fascinating breakdown in terms of just how you've gone through architecting Watchtower to where it is today, the kind of stepwise approach of the different automation elements and the picture that you painted in terms of, okay, what are the most automatable pieces today? Let's go ahead and do that, move the humans up, take care of the next piece, move it up again, and thinking through just how that information is conveyed back to users and used on an ongoing basis. Just very interesting and relevant space as the organizations are still incredibly reliant on penetration testing and often looking for other alternatives. So thank you.
Nice to meet you, Kyle. Thank you very much for your time. And great chat. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and you can write to me at kyle@secureventures.io. I'm Kyle McNulty, and you've been listening to Secure Ventures.